That morning, everything felt perfect. The house was buzzing with the energy of preparation for my 25th birthday. Sunlight filtered through the windows, bathing the room in a golden glow, and I was in a great mood. Sarah, my wife, was in the kitchen meticulously preparing the food for the party. Her humming echoed softly, and I couldn't help but smile as I decorated and tidied up the living room. Today was going to be fun. I was sure of it. We worked together seamlessly, bouncing ideas off each other, sharing laughs. It felt like old times. As the morning went on, we sat down to finalize the guest list. Most of the names were familiar. Friends we had grown close to over the years, a few family members who lived nearby, the usual crowd. But then, Sarah suddenly suggested a name I didn't recognize. "How about we invite Adam?" she asked casually, not even looking up as she scribbled on the notepad. I blinked, caught off guard. "Who's Adam?" She glanced up with a smile. "Oh, he's a coworker of mine. I met him recently at work." That was the first red flag. Someone she had just met a few days ago, and she wanted to invite him to my birthday? A stranger? My stomach tightened, and my mood dimmed just a little. "I've never heard of him. Why would we invite someone I don't even know?" Her smile wavered slightly, but she pushed on. "He's really nice. You'll like him, I'm sure. He's funny, a decent guy." She seemed almost too enthusiastic, her eyes brighter than usual. It made me uneasy. "I don't know, Sarah," I said, frowning. "It's my birthday, and I prefer not to have some random guy there. Can't we just stick to people we both know?" Her smile disappeared, replaced with a look of mild frustration. "He's not a random guy. I know him well. Besides, it's just one more person, and it'll be fun." "You're being unreasonable." "Unreasonable?" I bit back a retort, feeling my chest tighten with irritation. "I just don't think it's a good idea," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. But there was something in the way she defended him that set off alarm bells in my head. Her tone shifted, becoming sharper. "You don't trust me?" she asked, her eyes narrowing slightly. The question hit me like a slap. Trust? How had this turned into a question of trust? I stood there for a moment, feeling the tension between us thickening. It wasn't about trust, it was about the fact that I didn't want some stranger at a personal event, especially on a day that was supposed to be about us, about me. We argued for a few minutes, voices growing louder with each passing second. She became defensive, insisting that I was being irrational, while I dug my heels in, refusing to let go of the unease that had taken root in my gut. It wasn't just about the party anymore. It was the fact that she was fighting so hard for this guy's inclusion. Someone I had never heard of before. Someone she seemed too eager to invite. At one point, it felt like the argument might spiral into something bigger, something that would leave a scar on the day itself. But I didn't want to ruin my birthday, so I let it go. I gave in. "Fine," I muttered, throwing my hands up in defeat. "Invite him. Just don't expect me to be happy about it." She sighed, relieved but still tense, as if she had won some unspoken battle. "Thank you," she said quietly, and the conversation ended there, but the unease remained, lingering in the air like a bad smell. That night, as we lay in bed, the house now quiet, I stared at the ceiling, the earlier tension still gnawing at me. I tried to shake it off, telling myself that I was overreacting. It was just a party, just one extra guest. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't stop the uneasy feeling from growing stronger. Something didn't sit right with me. Something about the way she insisted on him being there felt wrong. I turned to look at her as she slept, her face peaceful and serene. And yet, beneath that calm exterior, I could feel the shift. I was angry. I was frustrated. I didn't want Adam at my birthday, and the thought of him being there gnawed at me. For a moment, I found myself wishing that something would happen, something to keep him away, something to make sure this stranger didn't intrude on what was supposed to be my special day. As I drifted off to sleep, I couldn't help but feel a sinking dread that this small incident was just the beginning of something much larger, something that would change everything. Sunday morning greeted me with the warmth of sunlight streaming through the windows. It was my birthday, and despite the lingering tension from the night before, I was determined to make the day a good one. As I sipped my morning coffee, I told myself to let it go. This was my day, and I wouldn't let a petty argument ruin it. I looked over at Sarah, who was in the kitchen again, putting the final touches on the food. She seemed cheerful, humming to herself as if nothing had happened. By noon, the house began to fill with laughter and the familiar voices of friends. I stood at the door with Sarah, greeting everyone as they arrived. The atmosphere was perfect. There was that buzz of excitement in the air, the kind that fills you with anticipation. I started to relax, feeling the earlier frustration slip away. Friends hugged me, wished me well, and handed me gifts. It was shaping up to be the kind of birthday I had hoped for, unforgettable for all the right reasons. Then he showed up. I didn't need anyone to tell me who he was. The moment Adam walked through the door, I knew it was him. He was tall, muscular, and lean with an easy charisma that instantly drew everyone's attention. The kind of guy people naturally gravitate toward. But it wasn't his looks that bothered me. It was the way Sarah reacted. As soon as she saw him, her face lit up in a way that I hadn't seen in a long time. Her eyes sparkled, and she smiled, really smiled. It reminded me of the first time we met, that look of excitement she had when I walked into the room. That look was now reserved for someone else. Adam strode in confidently, shaking hands with some of the other guests, and when he turned to me, he offered an easy grin. "Hey, happy birthday, man. I'm Adam." "Thanks," I replied, forcing a smile. I didn't want to be rude, especially in front of everyone, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. He seemed friendly enough, even likable. I could see why Sarah was drawn to him. He was the kind of guy who made you feel like you had known him for years within the first 5 minutes. At first, I tried to push my doubts aside. After all, he hadn't done anything wrong. In fact, I even found myself liking him as we exchanged small talk. He was funny, quick with a joke, and charming in a way that didn't feel forced. But the longer the day went on, the more I noticed how Sarah was glued to his side. No matter where I looked, she was always with him. If they weren't talking, they were laughing at some inside joke. If they weren't laughing, they were sharing glances across the room. At first, I told myself I was overreacting. Sarah had always been friendly, warm with everyone. But this was different. She barely left his side the entire day, and it was hard for me not to notice. I tried to enjoy myself, tried to mingle with the others, but my eyes kept drifting toward them. I felt like I was on the outside looking in, watching my wife share moments with someone else. I forced myself to swim with some friends in the pool, but even then, I couldn't shake the jealousy that gnawed at me. Afternoon turned into evening, and the party was in full swing. People were drinking, dancing, and some were already slumped on the couches, passed out from too much alcohol. The laughter and music filled the air, but all I could focus on was Sarah and Adam. I couldn't help but feel like an outsider at my own party, drowning in the noise while my wife's attention was consumed by someone else. Then it hit me. I hadn't seen Sarah for a while. My head snapped up as I scanned the room. She wasn't in the living room. My eyes swept over the crowd in the backyard, but she wasn't there either. I searched the kitchen and the patio, my unease growing by the second. And Adam was gone too. My heart sank as my mind raced with possibilities. Maybe they were just outside talking. Maybe they'd gone upstairs to grab something. But the longer I searched, the darker my thoughts became. I tried to stay calm, but it was impossible. The music thumped in the background, drowning out my thoughts, but I could feel my pulse quickening. I made my way upstairs, my footsteps echoing in the quiet hall. Each door I passed was another gut punch of realization. They weren't downstairs. They weren't outside. And as I reached the third floor, I heard it. A voice, muffled at first, but growing clearer as I approached the farthest room at the end of the hall. My blood turned to ice. "Yes, yes, come on, you slut, screw me." The words crashed into me like a tidal wave, freezing me in place. I felt paralyzed, my hand gripping the banister as the room tilted around me. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. For a moment, I thought my ears were playing tricks on me. But the voices continued, low, breathy, unmistakable. I forced myself forward, each step heavier than the last. My mind screamed at me to turn back, to not open the door, to stop whatever was happening from becoming real. But I had to know. I had to see. When I reached the door, my hand trembled as I reached for the handle. I wasn't ready for what I would find on the other side, but I had no choice. I had to open it. The sound of their voices echoed in my head, and my world collapsed around me. Everything inside me knew that whatever I was about to witness, it would change everything forever. My hands shook as I reached for the door, my heart pounding in my chest like a war drum. The voices inside, the ones I had hoped were just a nightmare, grew louder, filling the hallway with their sickening rhythm. The alcohol in my system did nothing to numb the dread flooding my veins. My head was spinning, my vision blurring, but I pressed on, the horror of the moment forcing me forward. I pushed open the door, and there they were, Sarah, my wife, bent over the bed in front of Adam. Both of them naked. The smell of sweat, cheap perfume, and alcohol was suffocating, filling the room like a poisonous cloud. Time seemed to stop, and for a second I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. All I could do was stare at the scene unfolding before me, my mind struggling to make sense of what my eyes were seeing. I screamed a raw, animalistic sound that tore through my throat. Everything I had held in, all the jealousy, the suspicions, the betrayal, it exploded out of me in a single breath. Sarah, she didn't turn to look at me. She was too far gone, lost in whatever madness had overtaken her. Adam, however, glanced over his shoulder with a smug grin, his body still pressed against my wife's. That look, that smirk, it pushed me over the edge. I charged at him, blinded by rage, my mind clouded with alcohol and fury. I didn't care that he was twice my size, that he could easily overpower me. In that moment, all I wanted was to make him pay. I slammed into him, catching him off guard, and for a second I thought I had the upper hand. I shoved him hard, sending him stumbling back. But Adam wasn't like me. He wasn't caught up in emotion. He was sober, in control, and he was built like a tank. Before I could even throw another punch, his fist connected with my face. The impact was like getting hit by a sledgehammer, and everything went dark. I collapsed to the floor, my vision swimming as I tried to regain my bearings. Blood filled my mouth, and my head throbbed with a pain so sharp it made my ears ring. Through the haze, I could hear Sarah's voice, slurred and panicked. Adam, stop. Please stop. She was crying now, her voice cracking, but her pleas were drowned out by the pulse of my own heartbeat pounding in my skull. I forced myself to stand, using the bedpost to pull myself up. My body screamed in protest, my legs wobbling beneath me, but I couldn't stay down. Not while that bastard was still standing. My eyes landed on a champagne bottle resting on the nightstand, half empty and still dripping with condensation. Without thinking, I grabbed it and swung with everything I had, smashing it over Adam's head. The bottle shattered, shards of glass raining down as the champagne sprayed across the room. For a moment he staggered, his eyes glazing over as if he might actually go down. But then, something in him snapped. He turned on me, his face twisted in anger. Before I could react, he lunged, swinging his fists so hard it felt like my skull had split open. I hit the floor again, my body collapsing like a rag doll. The room spun wildly, my vision fading in and out, the edges of my consciousness fraying. I could hear Sarah sobbing, pleading with him to stop, but Adam didn't care. He was on me in an instant, beating me mercilessly. His fists pounded into me over and over, each blow harder than the last. I tried to fight back, tried to block the hits, but it was no use. He was too strong. My body felt like it was on fire, pain searing through every muscle, every bone. I screamed in agony, the sound barely audible over the music still playing downstairs. My head snapped back with another punch, and everything went dark again. I don't know how long I was out, but when I came to, Adam was standing over me, naked, his chest heaving with exertion. In his hand, he held the neck of the broken champagne bottle, the same one I had hit him with. His eyes met mine for a split second, and in that moment, I knew what was coming next. With a savage yell, he brought the bottle down on my head. I didn't feel the pain at first, just a flash of blinding light, followed by the sound of glass shattering again. And then, nothing. The world went black. When I woke up, I was no longer in my house. The sterile smell of antiseptic filled my nose, and the steady beeping of machines echoed in my ears. The pain came next, sharp, all-encompassing, as if my entire body had been broken and stitched back together with fire. I tried to move, but even the slightest twitch sent a wave of agony crashing through me. "Don't move," a soft voice whispered beside me. "You're in the hospital." I turned my head slowly, my vision still blurry. Sitting beside the bed was Sarah. Her face was pale, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She looked broken, guilt etched into every line of her face. "Oh my God, you're awake," she whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. Tears streamed down her face, but I couldn't bring myself to care. I opened my mouth to speak, but my throat felt like sandpaper, and the words wouldn't come. A part of me wanted to scream at her, to demand answers. How could she do this? How could she betray me like that? In our home, on my birthday. But all I could do was lie there, helpless and broken, as the woman I loved wept beside me. The betrayal, the rage, the pain, it was all too much. And yet, as I stared at her, I knew that my body ached with every breath. But the pain was nothing compared to the storm raging inside me. As I lay in that hospital bed, barely able to move, Sarah clung to me, her sobs filling the sterile silence of the room. She wrapped her arms around me, her face buried in my chest, repeating the same desperate words over and over. "Please forgive me. I'm so sorry. Please, you have to forgive me." Her voice was soaked in regret, but it barely registered with me. My heart pounded in my chest, fueled by anger and betrayal. I tried to sit up, but the pain shot through me, forcing me back down. Still, I couldn't hold back the rage bubbling up inside me. "Why?" I rasped, my voice hoarse, each word scratching against my raw throat. "Why did you do it, Sarah? Why?" She pulled back, her face a mess of tears and guilt. "I didn't mean to," she sobbed. "I was drunk. I didn't know what I was doing. I swear." "Bullshit," I screamed, my voice cracking under the weight of fury. "You knew exactly what you were doing. You betrayed me. In our home, on my birthday." The words felt like fire as they left my mouth, burning with the weight of everything I had been holding inside since the moment I opened that door. Her sobs only grew louder, her shoulders shaking uncontrollably as she knelt beside the bed. I wasn't thinking. "Please, I love you. You have to believe me. I never meant to hurt you." But all I saw was red. Her apologies felt hollow, meaningless, like words from a stranger I no longer recognized. I was staring at the woman I had loved for years, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone else, but now she felt like someone else. Someone I couldn't trust. Someone who had ripped my world apart in the worst way imaginable. I shook my head, biting back the pain that radiated through my chest. "Get out," I said coldly, the words barely a whisper. "Just get out. I don't want to see you." She froze, her tear-filled eyes wide with panic. "No, please, don't say that. Don't." I said, "Get out," I shouted, forcing myself to sit up despite the stabbing pain. "Don't come back, Sarah. I can't look at you." Her face crumpled as she struggled to stand, her legs trembling beneath her. "Please don't do this. I'm begging you, just give me a chance to make this right. There's no fixing this." I cut her off, my voice shaking with the effort it took to keep from breaking down completely. "You ruined everything. You ruined us." For a moment, she stood there, silent, her hands trembling as she wiped away her tears. She opened her mouth to speak again, but I shook my head, cutting her off before she could even start. "Leave, Sarah. I don't want to hear it." Her breath hitched as she turned toward the door, her shoulders slumped in defeat. The sound of her footsteps echoed in the room as she left, and when the door clicked shut behind her, the silence that followed felt suffocating. For a long time, I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, sadness, confusion, betrayal. It all swirled together, a storm I couldn't escape. I wanted to scream, to cry, to break something, but all I could do was lay there, paralyzed by the weight of it all. She had ruined everything. My birthday, our life together, everything we had built. The thought of her with Adam, of what I had seen in that room, tore at me like a knife to the gut. I had never imagined that this could happen. Not with her. Not in our home. I didn't know how long I stayed like that, lost in the darkness of my thoughts. Time seemed to lose all meaning as the reality of what had happened sank in deeper and deeper. Eventually, I couldn't hold it in any longer. The dam broke, and I cried harder than I ever had before. I was alone, completely and utterly alone. Days passed like a blur, each one bleeding into the next as I drifted between sleep and the endless torment of my thoughts. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them together. Every time I opened them, I felt the weight of her betrayal crushing me all over again. When the doctors finally discharged me from the hospital, I felt like a shell of the man I used to be. The bruises on my body were nothing compared to the scars left on my heart. And as I walked through the front door of our house, the memories of that night slammed into me like a freight train. The house was eerily quiet. Sarah didn't expect me back so soon, and when she saw me standing in the doorway, her face paled. Her hands trembled as she began packing her things, her eyes red and swollen from days of crying. I'll go, she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper as she hurried to stuff clothes into a suitcase. I didn't think you'd be back so soon. I'll leave, but something inside me snapped. Sit down, I barked, the force of my voice startling even myself. She froze, her eyes wide with fear, as she stood motionless in the middle of the room. I could see the fear in her eyes, the way she trembled under the weight of my anger. She slowly sat down on the edge of the bed, her hands fidgeting nervously in her lap. I stood over her, my fists clenched at my sides, trying to keep the flood of emotions from boiling over. Tell me everything, I demanded, my voice cold and flat. About Adam. I want to know everything. She swallowed hard, her eyes darting to the floor as she struggled to speak. He's just a guy from work, she mumbled. It didn't mean anything. I was drunk, and I slammed my fist on the dresser, making her jump. Where does he live? She stared at me, her lips quivering as fresh tears welled up in her eyes. I don't want to. Where does he live, Sarah? I roared, the rage finally breaking through the surface. Tell me or so help me. She broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. Okay. I'll tell you, she whispered, her voice barely audible between her sobs. He lives on Mason Street, in the apartment complex by the park. I stood there for a moment, breathing heavily as the information sunk in. Mason Street. It was all I needed. Get out of my sight, I spat, turning away from her. I didn't need to hear any more excuses. I had everything I needed now. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Adam had destroyed my life, and I was going to make him pay. After Sarah gave me Adam's address, something inside me changed. The weight of her betrayal, the humiliation of what I'd seen, the pain of everything I had endured, it all hardened into something else. Something cold. Revenge. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. My thoughts were consumed by one thing: making Adam pay. The rage I felt didn't just sit inside me. It gnawed at me, growing stronger with every passing hour. The next few days passed in a blur of rage-fueled focus. I followed Adam, watching him, learning his routine, and waiting for the right moment. He was easy to track, predictable in his arrogance. He thought he had won, thought he'd taken something from me without consequence. But he had no idea what was coming. Each day, I grew more certain that what I was about to do wasn't just a desire. It was a necessity. I replayed every moment in my head. Every scene of that night, I found them together. And each time, the fire inside me burned hotter. Adam wasn't just a man anymore. He had become the symbol of my humiliation, of everything that had gone wrong in my life. I couldn't let that go unanswered. I wouldn't. Finally, the moment came. It was a Tuesday evening, the sky heavy with the promise of rain, but I didn't care. I knew Adam would be out his regular gym visit. I waited until the sun dipped low, then drove to his apartment on Mason Street. I parked a few blocks away, the darkness of the night wrapping around me like a cloak. The plan was simple, almost too simple, but that's what made it perfect. The gasoline sloshed in the container I brought, my grip tight as I approached the building. The street was deserted, the only sound the hum of distant traffic. I was methodical, moving quickly but carefully as I poured the gasoline around the front and sides of the building. My heart pounded, my breath shallow, but I was in control. By the time I was done, the scent of gasoline filled the air, thick and pungent. I stood there for a moment, staring at the dark apartment complex, imagining the flames consuming everything. Imagining Adam's smug face twisted in horror when he found out. Then, without hesitation, I lit a match and threw it. The fire caught instantly, flames licking up the side of the building, spreading like wildfire. It was almost beautiful in a twisted way, the way the fire illuminated the night, casting everything in a flickering orange glow. The heat was intense, but I stayed there for a moment, watching the flames grow, feeling a sense of release as the building began to burn. I didn't wait for anyone to come. As soon as I knew the fire had taken, I got back into my car and drove away, my heart still pounding, but my mind clearer than it had been in days. It was done. The revenge I had dreamed about, the justice I had craved, it was finally done. When I got home, I wasn't prepared for the scene waiting for me. Sarah was sitting on the floor, her back against the wall, her face buried in her hands. She was crying, her sobs heavy and broken, the kind of crying that comes from deep inside. The sight of her like that, so small, so defeated, made something twist in my chest. For a moment, just a moment, I hesitated, but then the anger returned, flooding back in waves. "Pack your things," I snarled, slamming the door behind me. My voice echoed through the house, shaking with rage. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. What are you talking about? Get out," I spat. "I don't want you here anymore. You ruined everything, Sarah. Everything." She stood up slowly, her body trembling, as if she could barely hold herself together. "Please just listen. I know I made a mistake, but we can fix this. I'll do anything. I love you." "Love?" I shouted, cutting her off. "You don't even know what that word means. If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this. You wouldn't have destroyed our life for a man like him." She broke down again, her sobs filling the room. "I was stupid. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. Please just give me one more chance." But I didn't care anymore. The sight of her, the sound of her voice, it only reminded me of the betrayal, of the pain. It only reminded me of what I had lost because of her. I couldn't look at her without feeling the fury rise inside me again. "Pack your things and get out," I repeated, my voice low but firm. "I don't want you here. Not anymore." She stood there for a moment, as if waiting for me to change my mind, but when she saw that I wouldn't, she finally moved. Slowly, she began gathering her things, tears streaming down her face the entire time. She tried to speak again, tried to explain, but I wouldn't let her. I couldn't hear another word from her. When she finally left, the house was eerily silent, the emptiness surrounding me like a heavy blanket. I should have felt relief, but all I felt was a strange hollowness, a void where everything used to be. The fire was burning somewhere out there, but inside me, there was nothing left, just the ashes of what my life used to be. The silence that followed Sarah's departure was suffocating. I stood in the middle of the living room, staring at the door she had just walked out of, waiting for some kind of emotion to hit me. Relief, satisfaction, even peace. But nothing came. Instead, an empty void gnawed at me, a cold emptiness that I couldn't shake. I had thought that getting rid of her would bring me closure, that seeing her pack her bags and leave would finally put an end to the torment swirling inside me. But it hadn't. The fire I had set at Adam's apartment played in the back of my mind like a scene from a movie. I could still see the flames spreading, climbing higher, consuming everything. The satisfaction I had felt in that moment was gone, replaced by an unsettling stillness. My revenge had been swift, burning hot in the moment, but now the ashes settled, leaving me with the reality of what I'd done. I sat down on the couch, the weight of everything pressing down on me. I had wanted to punish Adam, to take back some control of the chaos he had unleashed in my life. But now, sitting in the empty house, I wondered if it had been worth it. The image of Sarah's tear-streaked face lingered in my mind, her pleas echoing in my ears despite how much I had tried to shut them out. She had begged for forgiveness, and for a fleeting moment, I had almost considered it. Almost. I reached for my phone, scrolling mindlessly through the news to distract myself. That's when I saw it. A breaking news alert about a fire on Mason Street. The apartment complex had been completely engulfed in flames, and several units had been destroyed. I read the article in a daze, the details blurring together, but one line stood out, clear and sharp. Authorities are investigating the possibility of arson. My heart pounded in my chest. Arson. The reality of what I had done hit me like a freight train. I had set that fire with the sole purpose of destroying Adam's life, of getting back at him for what he had done to me. But in my rage, I hadn't considered who else might be affected, who else might have lived in that building. The thought of innocent people losing their homes because of me sent a cold shiver down my spine. I tried to push the guilt away, telling myself that Adam had deserved it. He had ruined my life, shattered my marriage, and taken everything from me. But the longer I sat there, the harder it became to convince myself that I had done the right thing. Had I gone too far? Had I let my anger turn me into someone I didn't recognize? The answer gnawed at me, refusing to let go. I had crossed a line, and there was no going back. Hours passed, the weight of what I had done pressing down on me. The house was so quiet it felt like the walls were closing in. Every creak, every shift of the floorboards made my heart race, as if the ghosts of my actions were haunting me, reminding me of the destruction I had caused. I stood up abruptly, pacing the room, unable to shake the growing anxiety that churned in my gut. The doorbell rang suddenly, shattering the silence. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. My mind raced through 1,000 possibilities. Sarah coming back, the police, someone who knew what I had done. With shaking hands, I walked toward the door, each step heavier than the last. When I opened it, I was met with a sight I hadn't expected. It wasn't Sarah. It wasn't the police. It was Adam. He stood there bruised and beaten, but very much alive. His eyes were filled with a cold fury that matched the anger I had once felt. For a second, we just stared at each other, the air between us thick with tension. He didn't say a word. Neither did I. Then, without warning, he lunged at me. The impact knocked the breath out of me as we crashed to the floor. His fists came down hard, each punch a reminder of the fire I had set, the revenge I had thought would make me whole again. But as the blows rained down on me, all I felt was the weight of my own guilt. I didn't fight back. I couldn't. It was like some part of me had already given up, resigned to the fact that I had become the very thing I hated. Eventually, Adam stopped, breathing heavily as he stood over me. Blood dripped from his knuckles, my face throbbing with every heartbeat. For a moment, I thought he might say something, offer some final insult or taunt. But he didn't. He just looked at me, his expression unreadable, and then turned and walked out the door, leaving me alone with the consequences of everything I had done. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, my chest heaving as I struggled to catch my breath. The silence returned, heavy and suffocating. And for the first time, I realized that no amount of revenge would ever fix what had been broken inside me.